So how's everybody tonight? Everybody good? Everybody caffeinated and hydrated and fed? And there's all kinds of stuff in the back if you're interested. in that.
Cool.
Nice guy.
Very nice. Future mayor.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I apologize, we didn't factor into the equation, Mr. Mowla's last State of the Union address when it was set tonight, or the school board meeting for that matter, so I guess we have some competition, so thank you all for coming. Typically what I do is I spend a couple of minutes just to sort of highlight so what the council's done in the last little bit, and then kind of open it up to your comments and thoughts and questions and things that we can answer. And if we can't answer them, Maddie, our city manager, is here. Therese Kosterman is here. So we'll take some notes and we'll get back to you with the answers if in fact we don't know the answer to whatever the question is. So what have we done in the last little bit? It's, you know, what's the big stuff that's sitting out there? We got some big things sitting out there. The biggest is probably the two biggest things that are sitting out there for the council. The first is obviously the drought, the ongoing conversation about water, and now we're kind of to the point where we've not met our targets for conservation, and we'll probably face some penalties from the state as a result of that. And at the same time, we're trying to craft a fee structure for water that is fair, but at the same time reflects what our costs of doing business are going to be and how they're going to escalate and how we actually ultimately get to pay for some of the fines that we're probably going to face. And that's hard. I think that's really hard. We've talked about it a lot. We've talked about the drought and conservation and all of that now for at least 6 or 7 months. At our last, we had probably the third or fourth presentation of what might be the new fee structure. And the council was uncomfortable with the way it was lining up at our last meeting, so we took a step back from it in order to revisit it and see if we can kind of cast it either in a different way that makes more sense, or that we can explain it better, or that perhaps mitigate some of the impacts that would come from it. So still a work in progress. Unfortunately, the economics of water are complicated and very counterintuitive, and so as we use less water, and we are using less, not as much less as we should, but we're still using less water. The counterintuitive piece is that the cost per gallon actually goes up, and that's because the fixed costs of water are so high, and those fixed costs are in fact fixed. So if you take the number and divide it by fewer gallons, then the pennies or dollars per gallon go up. In the aggregate, if you use less water, then the total number of dollars will be less, but you know, for everybody's household, that'll depend on how much you use and how much you save, and what your previous usage was and how you compare now to then. So it's a complicated target and hard to explain. And so the council is still struggling with what is this going to look like as we move it forward. Unfortunately, too, the water has to get paid for and the infrastructure has to get paid for. And so at this point, what's happening is we're paying for it out of what are reserves in this fund, money that had been saved in order to replace pipes and reservoirs and things like that. And at some point, we'll probably make a decision that says we don't want to take all of the money out of that, but we're going to have to take some money out of the city's checking account, what's called the general fund. And while that general fund is actually taxpayer money, and so we're subsidizing taxpayer water with taxpayer money for the most part, not completely, it does mean that those dollars that come out of the general fund will not be available for other things that the city might otherwise spend money on. And you know, our goal is to make the water enterprise support itself. It's a business of itself. It's supposed to support itself. And to the extent that we have to subsidize it, it's not a great fiscal policy. It's something that the city has done in years past, and unfortunately, getting out of that over time, once you decide that you're not going to do that anymore, really takes a lot of time, and all it really does, it defers the rate increases to a later day. So we don't want to really get there either, and so we're going to struggle with this a little bit longer, and I hope that in the next month or so we can figure out a way that seems to make some sense and we can move forward. The other big thing that's going to start in the next months is something that's been delayed a long time, and that is the reconstruction of Santa Monica Boulevard. So we've talked about big Santa Monica Boulevard, North Santa Monica Boulevard now for a long time. We bought it from the state a number of years ago, and probably what was both a good and a bad deal, the state didn't give us nearly enough money to fix the roadway, and we didn't fix it even with the money they gave us, and so today we're sitting with a roadway that really, as best we can tell, needs much more reconstruction than it might have at the time, and at a cost that's multiples of what it was then. So we're looking at a project that's got a $35 or $40 million price tag, a guesstimate.
But just in Beverly Hills.
Just in Beverly Hills, not all of Beverly Hills. That price tag only gets us from Doheny to Wilshire. The area between Wilshire and Marino will come later after the construction of the Waldorf Astoria and whatever happens at the 9900 project. No point in doing that roadway just to have them mess it up as they bring these heavy trucks in. But the bigger impact, I mean, we can afford to repair it, but the bigger impact is going to be the impact on traffic. We'll have almost 2 years of traffic impact, and a big piece of the conversation is how do we mitigate that impact through the residential communities? What is that going to look like, and how do we move things around? So far, we haven't seen that plan. That's due to us in the next month or so, and based on that, and based on how the council perceives this plan is going to work, we'll make some decisions about how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it and all of that. There's a lot of work that has to go into timing and like from where to where, over what period of time, and what are the mitigations of that, and then as that one's done, from someplace else to someplace else until the project is done. It's probably somewhere between 1.5 years and 2 years to completion, and so we're going to be living with this for a while. When it's done, it'll be a good thing.
Is it only repaving?
Well, it's beyond repaving. It's actually all the way down to the infrastructure piece. And beyond that, we're going to have to deal with a lot of drainage issues that are coming out of the alleys and such. And these drainage, and part of the reason the roadway is damaged is the fact that the drainage has been poor for so long. And so this is going to, we're going to have to figure out how to do all of the above. There's some actually big drainage channels through that are almost perpendicular across Santa Monica Boulevard that are going to have to get replaced. And so this will also have to coordinate with work in Beverly Gardens Park. We don't want to have to dig that up twice. And so this is a major project. It's going to be very impactful. It's going to take a couple of years to get it done. We do hope to complete it significantly before we begin to see the impact of the subway at La Cienega and Wilshire. We would hate to be doing both at the same time or in near proximity. That would really be a mess. And so timing here is critical, and actually getting this plan in place is a major priority for the next couple of months to get that actually done. So those are probably the two biggest things that are going on. You know, over the course of the last 6 or 8 months, we've been fortunate. We've got a brand new city manager. We have an interim police chief. We'll have a new police chief. We're going to have to find a way to replace Councilmember Bryan, who's leaving shortly.
Yes, I was going to ask you that.
And so it's been a busy year. We've done a lot of good stuff. So that's kind of I mean, I could talk forever, but I'm more interested in what you guys have on your mind. So I know would you like to go first, sir?
I don't mind going first.
Go ahead.
In fact, I will tag on that I am the manager and part owner of the Landmark Center, which is located between La Cienega and San Vicente, having only Wilshire Boulevard access, and we have a number of 13 or so stores. But I'd like to tag on that we are replacing all of our toilets, and we are replacing our landscaping. to have, underground, whatever they subterranean irrigation. So we're on board and having purators put on all of our tenants' faucets.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
we're on to the program.
Thank you.
The mayor was kind enough to hear some of this, and probably in a better form before you all arrived. And I have a little copy of this outline for people who are interested. As you know, it's a small shopping mall on the southeast corner of Wilshire Boulevard and San Vicente. And our issue is, because we know there's going to be some pain through this process, we don't expect to get through this whole process of the closure whole. There's no illusions of that. But we feel and we could be wrong, but we feel there's a flawed decision-making process in choosing between the two Metro Purple Line options for closing Wilshire Boulevard between La Cienega and San Vicente. One is 6 weeks or 16 weekends. In earlier Metro and city meetings, community meetings, attendees were asked which alternative they preferred, a 6-week closure or a 16-week closure. Obviously, all of us, including myself, would like to get it over sooner. But they were not presented with the traffic management plan, which they call a TMP, under consideration as an integral part of both closures. And that's required.
By the city of Beverly Hills?
Well, it's required that they can't cut us off completely, so they have to do some mitigation. Mitigation is some kind of a traffic plan.
Sure.
So it happens that between these two alternatives, the 6 weeks or the 16 weekends, the plan, and these are still in the works, mitigation are pretty much identical, taking the form of being able to enter the shopping center through Tower North, making a right turn on Wilshire and a right turn into the lot. Now the problem is, to get to Tower, is you have to go down Gregory. And Gregory, at this point, is a traffic problem. It's been growing. So doing that on the weekend, during the week, is going to be a big burden to the adjacent tennis center, the park, and also when you go up Tower, that is a permitted street, permitted parking. Are you going to stop the parking on Tower? And also, there are going to be, like I used to be when I was young and in business before I retired, savvy drivers that are going to discover that going down Gregory and up Tower is a great way to continue on going east on Wilshire Boulevard.
But a lot of the traffic is feeding into San Vicente. I used to live in Carthay Circle, so they're cutting.
Okay, I live in Carthay Circle. So, yeah. So the plans are the same. And the other one they're permitting is they're allowing us now to have occasionally left turns into the property. These left turns have been illegal for over 20 years. But they're trying to find something. And the problem with that left turn that they're going to be offering during the closure is that, first of all, if somebody makes a mistake and gets into that, crosses San Vicente, and makes a left turn, they're going to be forced either onto the street or into our center, where they will be trying to get out by passing cars who are trying to back in and out of spaces on the lot, and then go out the exit. Then go around all the way around to the exit, and then they're to be forced to going east when they were intending to go west.
So just to address that, and we sort of did this a little bit before, the traffic management plan is not, we've only seen a preliminary one, and we sent it back for some more work. We have not approved the plan. And as I reflected to you too, even the city of Los Angeles had some issues with the metro plan. So all that's sort of a work in progress.
I really appreciate, that, and I appreciate your confiding that to me and giving me the opportunity to express it. But the problem is that it's hard to imagine any other traffic management that can be accomplished if the 17-week closure is accomplished, is decided upon. The heavy traffic on Gregory won't be there. And also my tenants will be able to survive because their customers can work around the weekends. 6 full weeks of closure for a pharmacy or a hair salon or a printer is pretty devastating. But I'm directing myself to the fact that opinions are being developed without attaching to them the traffic management plan. So there's a general opinion on the street and wherever I talk that we want to get it over faster, and I can appreciate that. And my concern in coming here is to indicate the very negative possibilities of the 6-week closing, not only to my center, but also to the surrounding office and residential areas, because they're going to go through this hell all week. And so, as I say, I really do appreciate the time to say this, and I would like to see that there will be a decision made with the traffic management plans on the table and understood before the final decision is made.
But that'll certainly be true. And what we need to do is make sure that we have your contact information so that subsequent conversations about this you can participate in. And express this in front of the entire council too.
Okay, I have some rough copies of what I said, so if people would like
Well,
to
the
have-
conversation has been, Wilshire will close
Completely.
completely.
Oh.
And the question is,
Makes sense.
If people want more,
do we close it for a weekend and then open it up during the week? Or do we close it for 6 weeks running?
people want other copies or.
Most of that, we've had 4 or 5, I don't know, we've had a fair amount of conversations around this, some in front of the council, some that have been done at the park, they've been all over. The general, I think, accurately reflected, the general sense was let's just get it done.
Really?
Yeah, because the broader impacts are, I think, perceived to be greater by opening and closing and opening and closing. And the length of time it's going to take to get it done, sort of based on the number of actual hours they work, is greater just because you spend time opening and closing. So but there's no decision that's been made. The plans that have been presented are at best preliminary draft. They're out there for public comment, so it's wonderful that you're bringing the public
May I
comment.
just add one thing there, and the mayor has expressed to me that this may not be the limits. There is essentially a business interruption fund available to small businesses. But that fund is limited to $50,000 a year. Now, after 12 months or 11 months of the kind of lane closing and temporary closures that our businesses are getting, and we're losing business already, the $50,000 isn't going to go very far.
Right, and then that's another piece again.
No, and
just to reflect
I'm only adding
accurately.
that piece, and I appreciate you told me about
We
that.
have not completed, we've actually not begun, really, the negotiation with Metro about what the extent of business interruption insurance is gonna look like, or assistance for small business in the course of that time. So if you already have the 50,000, I think that's great, but it's likely that there'll be more assistance available after we finish the conversation with Metro. So that's very much, we very much understand that there are gonna be business impacts and that Metro's gonna have to take responsibility for that. And to their credit, they understand it also. So it's really just a negotiation about how much. So we're not there yet. We haven't had that negotiation.
Great.
One Metro stop, La Cienega How many metro stops?
So there'll be 2 metro stops in the city. The first will be La Cienega, Wilshire. And with some luck or whatever, we ought to be done with that stop in 6 or 8 years, something like that. The second stop is Beverly, Wilshire,
No,
called the Rodeo stop, but it's probably a block away.
no.
And we've begun to have some conversation about what that would look like.
Just
And clearly
not
that's gonna
Santa
be.
Monica. I thought maybe Santa Monica would be a better choice to get people.
Well, there was never any, this purple line was never intended to go along Santa Monica Boulevard for this part of the route. The conversation about the high school notwithstanding. This part of the route was always intended to go from La Cienega to Beverly to someplace. There is conversation about an offshoot of the route that would take it up San Vicente, probably with a stop at the Beverly Center, potentially a stop on Santa Monica Boulevard. But I know that West Hollywood is advocating for that. They very much want that. It's theoretical at the moment. There's
So we have 2
no real
stops.
plan. We will have 2 stops within the city limits.
And then one goes to Century City, is that right?
And then after that to Century City. The stop after that is Century City, and the stop after that is Westwood. And that'll be the path of the train. So we're very much attuned to your issues, sir. And I would encourage you to please come to the council and express them as we will make sure that you get noticed when we're gonna have that conversation.
My
Thank you.
contact information is on these sheets.
Is that right?
Thank you.
So
What
you-
else?
your Jan tickets?
What's on other people's minds?
The water issue, in the Courier it listed that there were homes that are really using an incredible amount of water that have not cut back. Are those people going to be fined, or does the city
Well,
have to pay for their overusage?
short answer is yes. The,
I mean, they're using a bazillion gallons a day.
so it's complicated. The answer is, if they are using beyond what the mandatory reductions are, they will in fact pay the penalties like everybody else. Some part of the problem, I suppose, is the fact that if, and I'm making up numbers, but if a year ago you were using 2 million gallons of water a day, and today you're using 1 million gallons of water a day, you've cut your utilization in half, you're still using too much water,
Right.
but you'll fall well below the penalty structure.
Oh, really?
Well, the penalty structure is if you conserve 12%, if you don't conserve 12%, not even 12%, so anything less than 12%, you pay the highest fines. If you conserve between 70% and 88%, there's still a surcharge, but it's a much less surcharge. And if you're under the 70% mark, based on your historic use, then there are no penalties.
So this is under state law. Actually, the state board, water board have mandated that the target be set to 2013. So the comparison of every period needs to go back to the 2013 consumption.
Even if they use,
This is how they said that. That's how they set it up,
Right.
unfortunately, and we're kind of mandated to follow that
We're
schedule.
sort of stuck with that. So, so the answer, they'll still pay for a lot of water, because they'll pay for that that hypothetical million gallons of water, but they're not gonna hit any of the penalties because they've conserved within the context of what the
that
state
really
has
just
created
doesn't
as law.
feel right.
This was fairly hastily done. There are lots of, if this were a law that had developed over a little more time, I suspect it would have been a much more thoughtful piece of legislation. The fact is that it was done in relatively short order, and as a result, there are an awful lot of things that we would have liked to have seen done differently that we didn't. But this is not something that we had any input into. This is
Does the
driven by the state.
municipal charge them the fees, or does the city charge them the fees?
We do. The water
Do
district.
they pay them?
Well, we've only just sent out those bills,
Oh.
but I'm gonna presume that they're gonna pay them. They
A lot of people
come
do.
join us.
A lot of people do ignore their water bills, I understand.
I'm sorry?
I understand a lot of people ignore their water bills.
I don't think that that's true. I think, I don't know that to be true. I expect that people pay their bills.
I have some water questions as
Sure.
well. 4 points. The first, you mentioned that we may need to dip into the general fund to cover some of the tax penalty. Looking into the future, will the income from the Waldorf Astoria, because it's a higher tax rate being a hotel, will that revenue that's generated down the pike help to compensate it all for our dipping into the general fund now?
Well, sort of yes and sort of no. The water fund is supposed to be its own business. And so everything that happens in that, including all of our plans to develop our own wells and test the shallow groundwater and run the reservoirs and run the treatment plant, all of that is supposed to come from dollars that are paid in water fees. So it's all embedded in the water bill. If we can't accomplish that, if we cannot accomplish that, then that still has to get paid. I mean, there are expenses there that have to get paid. And the question becomes, where does that money come from? Well, one way to do it would be to take it out of the general fund, the city's big checking account. The checking account, that general fund, most of the money comes from, there are four major sources: sales tax, business tax, real estate tax, and hotel tax. So to the extent that the Waldorf or any other business pays taxes, those taxes go into the checking account and could be used. They would in fact offset, but that's still bad fiscal management, because those dollars are really not intended for that purpose. Those are dollars that we should be using to build a park, or to, and even there's the park has its own fund, but we should use to repave streets, or we should use to hire more policemen, or we should buy a new fire engine, or we should, So, but those are decisions that the council makes a lot. And just to kind of put it in context, the parking fund is also a separate fund. It's supposed to be a separate business. But because we give away free parking, the parking fund periodically finds itself with a significant deficit. The only way we got rid of that was to take money out of the general fund and put it in the parking fund to pay that deficit. So these are decisions that get made. They're I think theoretically they're not the best fiscal policy. Each of these funds ought to be self-sustaining. We really need to create a water structure that will not only pay for our current costs of water, but will allow us to save money to pay for new infrastructure. We've created new forms of revenue in the face of capacity, called capacity fees, where people who now, and in particular large water users like new hotels, who have big hookups to the city, will pay for that, a one-time fee called the capacity charge. But in the aggregate, we really have to have an ongoing fee structure that actually makes sense.
Thank you. The next question I have is, you mentioned that as we consume fewer gallons, the cost per barrel or gallon goes up. Is there a break point that anybody has mathematically analyzed that tells us when we dip to this point, the cost, because we have so many barrels and the cost has gone up to this number, it would be the same as if we were consuming more at a lower rate, that total cost would actually be the same?
Well, you could probably figure that out for yourself at home. It's a fairly complicated math question. We could calculate what the fixed cost of water per gallon is. And we could also demonstrate what the variable cost, the actual water cost per gallon is. Then you would have to do the math around your utilization to say, well, if I use X amount of water at this fixed cost and this variable cost, it's going to cost me whatever, and to change it around the other way, you could make that comparison against your historic water bill.
I guess I meant the context of the city paying for all the water.
Well, there is none. We'll never break even. I mean, the only way we break even is to use the same amount of water.
Point where we could actually use a little bit more at a lower cost and be paying less than if we were doing a little bit less at a higher cost, there could be a break point. I don't know if it fulfills the 12.5% reduction or more, but
Yeah, I don't,
it was just a thought when you mentioned that the
Yeah.
cost and that there could be.
I don't know that that's mathematically possible. I'd actually have to sit down with a pencil and see if it.
The third question I have has to do with snow cap. So I remember you spoke at a couple of meetings ago and talked about when we were awaiting El Nino, that despite the fact El Nino's on the way, that is not going to cure our problem. Our problem is long-term.
Right.
Nevertheless, if our water problem, our water source is based in great part on the snow cap,
Mm-hmm.
if we have significant snowfall,
Mm-hmm.
as we've begun to have, might that change your outlook
Mhm.
on how far and long and what extremes we have to take?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that you're right, the snow cap is better than it's been. But most people have said that the snow cap, the really high layer snow cap, is as low as it's been in 500 years. So, Gesundheit. So, it sounds like we need a ton of snow. Now, we may get it, and I think the experts have said, you know, if we have 4 or 5 years of continuing snow, we may come to the point where this goes away. I think what's going to happen in the short term, the snow cap actually does reflect the long-term, it really is the long-term reservoir for the water supply to the region currently. And so we have real reservoirs and lakes along the way, and but in the end, the real reservoir for our water supply is in fact the snow cap. If we come to a point where the snow cap has rebuilt, it won't be this year, but if we come to a point where the snow cap has rebuilt, then I think, yes, we may be at a drought for a while. What is more likely to happen is, if we get to a point where the reservoirs are fuller because of El Nino, and the stage D water emergency is stopped by the governor, and now it's scheduled to be ended at the end of February, although some discussion about maybe extending it through October. But if in fact that goes away, I think what is likely to happen, what the city council has done in times past, is to ease the surcharges. And although the water use charges will have traditionally and may still stay the same, what may go away will be the surcharges, because the surcharges are embedded in that stage D emergency. So I think that part may change. I do think, though, that we have an obligation. And I think the one thing that this drought has demonstrated, and we've had droughts before this, but at least in my experience, the one thing that should come out of this drought is we should never find ourselves in this place again. You know, we should, you know.
Desalination plants.
Well, I don't know about that, but we should certainly own the fact that we live in a desert, and that we need to be smart about the use of water. We need to have water-tolerant plantings. We need to not waste water. You know, we have to change the culture, and we have to learn to live in an arid land. And so that has to come from this. And if that comes from this, and we all start to conserve water on a regular basis, regardless of drought or not drought, then I think that the next time this happens, we'll find ourselves in a much better space.
Thank you. And the last point that I want to make is that in our city, there are, as we all know, a number of multi-unit housing apartment buildings and homes that are old and that were built in the 30s plus or minus. And many of these homes haven't been retrofitted to today's standards for plumbing, where you turn on your faucet and hot water comes out. There's still many, many, many homes and residents that to get hot water or warm water, even for health purposes, takes a while. And so we've begun to try to capture that water in pictures and to do this and that. But the truth of the matter is, it's inconvenient and not everybody's doing it. And I go to my own faucet and I wish for a device, and I just want to put it out there in case somebody can invent this. But when you turn the water and you put an attachment on the faucet that somehow recycles or recirculates the cold water back into the pipes, it doesn't come out of the faucet yet until the water temperature reaches a desired temperature. And then the flow starts to come out.
You know, there are systems like that. I think people put them in their showers more than in their kitchen sink.
Yes.
But I think certainly for the shower, their showers, somehow they have recirculating or constantly heated systems. that will get you hot water in your shower pretty quick, but I don't know if anybody's done it for the
Kitchen
kitchen.
and bathroom.
Yeah.
Anyway, food for thought.
It's a great idea. Sir?
Well, there's a much bigger way of saving water in connection with apartments. And as you may know, the federal EPA did a study a couple of years ago confirming what apartment owners have known for many, many years. And that is when you convert a master metered apartment building for water to individual meters, the consumption on that building is now 28%.
Sure, and that
That's
makes
a
sense.
huge savings. And I wonder why the city of Beverly Hills City Council hasn't issued a directive to the water department
Should be a
saying,
statewide
start converting
Yeah,
master meters.
so we've talked about this, let me address that. We've talked about this a little bit. I think for new construction, that's very likely to happen, and we've had those conversations.
But for existing construction,
For
it's fine.
for existing construction, there are a couple of major issues. First off, the cost of doing it is not small.
Yes, it is small. I'm sorry, I'm an apartment owner, and I've had it appraised on my 36 unit building, for example. And it is small. It was $775 per unit for 2 meters per unit. What the utility will tell you is just what you're saying. Oh, no, this is so expensive. You have to do home run pipes from the alleyway all the way to the apartment. And if the building wasn't built that way, well, you can't convert it. That was true for the first 100 years of indoor plumbing. But in the last 10 or 15 years, we have the electronic meters now, which are small, about the size of a cottage cheese, size and shape of a cottage cheese container, and they can be read electronically, which means they can be put anywhere in the building. You don't need them out in the alley or in the public access.
So we've heard about those technologies, we haven't actually seen them, so I'd be curious to see what
Those water meters, they're installed all throughout Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills has installed them throughout the city.
I think he's talking about the
Neptune.
the computers that we have which transmit the signal.
Right.
I think the issue is really it's in the plumbing system of the building itself. If the plumbing building of this, the building itself has a plumbing system that can afford separate meters, that's much easier to accomplish than buildings that don't have that, which means you have to separate the plumbing within the building itself in order.
That's not true. I don't know who's telling you that. The city needs to retain a good plumbing engineer, and it's just not.
I can tell you, I have an engineering background, and in fact, our building department, that's exactly what they do.
But submetering
we'll
companies
look
are
at-
doing
we'll look at-
submetering companies are
we'll-
doing
we'll-
it.
So I think it's worth looking at. I think it's a great idea. We knew that when we started this, that one of the, that probably the single family homes would be the most compliant. They're, clearly you're paying your own bill, and landscaping was a big deal and you could cut it down. We also knew that the multifamily homes were gonna be more complicated, especially if there's only a single meter that goes to them. And the commercial businesses have their own set of issues too. So we sort of understood that, but I think that if there's a technological way that we could make this happen sooner, I think you're right, we ought to look at that. We will.
I'm sorry?
We will look at that.
Oh.
We will look at that. Yes, ma'am.
That's it.
Someone's got it.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this. This is a wonderful
pleasure.
way for the citizens to,
I'm
come
happy
in
to
and-
do it.
Yeah. I'm an Overdale parent,
Mhm.
and you know that we are going through our construction,
Mhm.
and that a lot of the children have been moved into bungalows.
Mhm.
I am an active PTA parent. I fundraise. I'm on sponsorship committee that brings in money because I believe in the unified and how we all have to pitch in to give better opportunities. I'm also a working parent, and there is an after-school childcare service through the Beverly Hills City called Adventure Camp that I utilize for my son. And in the relocation of El Rodeo children into the bungalows, no bungalow was ever issued and allocated for the Adventure Camp children, and there's 50 of them. And so what's happened now is that the children are in the cafeteria. And it is not a safe environment. It is a filthy environment, even though they do try and clean it. There is no comfortability. There is no space for a child who wants to be on his own and read a book. There's no comfortable space for them to go in. And the principal of El Rodeo did not allocate that bungalow for the Adventure Camp kids. And when I spoke to Terry Angel, one of the supervisors, supervisors of the Adventure Camp program, she stated, quote unquote, that the city was okay with this. Now, I don't believe that the higher ups really had a full knowledge of what was going on. In fact, the parents of the Adventure Camp, and I'm speaking for many, many parents, I just happen to be the one going through the brick wall, are not, obviously, not satisfied with it. We weren't told that we weren't getting a bungalow. There was an email that went out December 22nd, only stating that we'd be moving into a new space, but didn't tell us it was a shared cafeteria. We're also going to be next door to the building that is essentially condemned, that will be going through lead abatement. So we also have the additional issue of these kids being near a section with lead abatement. And how we're handling that, no one knows, not even the supervisor for Adventure Camps yet, no knowledge. Now they have the space, and they can put in a bungalow in the entry grassy knoll area, which is adjacent to the kindergarten play area that has a fence. They can put another one if they chose not that space in back of the administration building. So there are spaces they could put a bungalow. I'm bringing this to you because our children of working parents who are community leaders, who go to shopping at the grocery stores and participate in fueling the local businesses, need your assistance. My son is here. Can you tell them a little bit about the space and how you don't like it?
Yeah, because there's like tables everywhere and like there's no corners. And like, you like to read a book, and like, you know. And
can you play down on the floor?
Well, you can't really play down on the floor because there's no space to put carpets on the floor.
That's right.
Because like, and it's all dirty, and you don't want to go in the dirt.
What's your name?
Barrett.
And how old are you, Barrett?
7.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for talking. Thank you.
So let me address that, and I'm glad you brought that to our attention. We went through a fairly, I thought, rigorous process over multiple months with the school district, trying to understand what the impacts of their closures were. You recognize that those decisions were made by the school board with little or no consultation from the city as to what was going to happen with that. The only thing we did do was we entered into, as I said, multiple conversations to ensure that the city programming that was currently housed at the schools had appropriate replacement facilities. And we were told that each of the programs that we had, the spaces had been identified, they were appropriate, so much so that we actually had conversations about having bungalows specifically for city-based programming.
There is none.
So I think that's something that we need to go back to the school district with and understand better. It was never our intent. It was quite the contrary. It was absolutely our intent, and I thought we had been pretty clear that our expectation was that we would have appropriate replacements as they move kids out of what were whatever spaces they had for the city-based program. So we'll follow up on that, and we'll get you an answer to that, because that was never our intent.
Thank you. And I have talked to the superintendent, and he, albeit lovely and very proactive, deferred me and said it's a city program and our hands are tied. Yeah.
That's absolutely.
And the supervisor, direct supervisor, Terry Angel, was quite flustered and not knowledgeable.
We will investigate. We'll come back with an answer.
Thank you.
Okay,
I
we'll do
appreciate
that, even if we have to push them to get another bungalow.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, how are you? Everyone, my name is Rita Ortiz. I'm so happy to be here and talk about how the community and schools. And we have I am member to Go Shepherd. The church is in Santa Monica and close to Belfort. It's in the corner. It's a I come already with the Beverly Hills homeless meeting they have every month, and I try to figure out why is a lot of homeless or people in the corner every single Sunday drink alcohol, like a 8 person in the morning. My daughter is very scared. I'm parents with the Beverly Vista. My daughter is here to in the school. And that's happened for almost 6 years, because I remember the Good Shepherd for 7 years. And I tried to talk these people 3 weeks ago. I took a picture for them, drink alcohol. And when asked to the office, to the church, they say it's part with Beverly Hills City. I like to know if it's any possibility they move these shares. They can see, though I don't know if I can help with. Don't let these people do that, because I'm trying to talk to them nice, to believe in God, and please don't do that, or change the other corner. I don't know what I need to do. It's Sunday morning, around 6 hours, around 10 a.m. the morning. It's every Sunday for years.
So, you know, we started a program. We hired some people, we call them ambassadors. They're the guys who walk around or ride on their bikes in green shirts, specifically to deal with these sorts of issues. And have you tried calling them to?
Yeah, I give you the information, this meeting today. They advise me call them, and if they drink alcohol, I can call the police, because it's too much. It's years, and nobody can.
No, but the ambassadors didn't want to come.
That's happened today.
Okay. So what I would suggest that you can do a couple of things. One thing you can do that they actually like, you have their phone number. It's a cell phone, so take a picture.
Yeah, take a picture.
And text it to them.
Show you what happened.
No, but text it to them in real time.
Oh, okay.
So you take a picture of whatever's going on. This is true not only there, but throughout the triangle. So if stuff's happening, if there are homeless people, if there's an aggressive panhandler, if there's something that gives you concern, what you ought to do is, you can certainly pick up the phone and call, but the other thing you can do is actually take a picture of it and text it to them with where you are.
Okay.
And they'll come. And we've actually used it a couple of times. And they're prompt, and they're really good at what they do, and they'll manage the situation, whatever it is. And I would try that. We've had them now for about 4 or 5 months. And I think that, well, if they don't come, well, there are two things. If they don't come, I would try it a second time. If they really don't come the second time, please let me know.
Oh,
We will deal with that, because they're getting paid a lot of money to show up. And beyond that, if you have something that you're feeling threatened by, that you really, the police are obviously the other alternative, and just call them and they'll come. But our experience to date has been pretty good, that the ambassadors have responded in, they're not 3-minute response times like the police, but they are prompt, and they will come and they will help manage the situation. And as I said, everything we've heard so far has been that they've been pretty good at what they've done. And the last time we got a report on this, I don't think there was anything negative about it at all. So I'm confident that you should get a pretty good response. And if you don't have the number, we'll get you the card with the
Every
phone number.
Sunday.
Where?
Share that with us.
In Santa Monica, in Bedford.
Yeah, it's on the website too.
Good Shepherd.
Good Shepherd.
And,
They've been there for years.
It would be great if you could get those
That's
to
the
PTA
church.
chairs. And
Well,
so
you
No,
know-
get out
because
to
when
the
I asked.
Okay, well,
That's the
we,
church.
you know, we
That's the church.
let me
Beverly
see.
They let them stay. I know it's homeless.
That's
Do you-
okay.
do you want-
I know it's homeless,
So
but the
it's,
church
uh,
doesn't kick them out.
It's
I understand. It's been going on.
Maddie, what is the number?
No, the church tried
424.
to talk to them, they don't listen.
302-1487.
So here's the number. It's a good number, if you don't have it, to write it down. And it's actually a good number, that I'm glad that we're recording this, so people hear. What was it, Maddie?
424-302-1487.
404.
424.
And you texted that 424?
424 302 1487.
That's our ambassadors.
These are the ambassadors, these are guys in the green shirts, and some are on foot, some are on bicycles. And they patrol the triangle and
Why did we
park.
hire ambassadors? I mean, just because the police were overwhelmed, or what was the reason behind the ambassadors?
They serve many functions. They serve this function in terms of aggressive panhandling or homeless, but they also serve as wayfinders, so that if somebody is looking for the Beverly Wilshire and they're lost, they'll point them in the right direction.
I do that a lot.
If somebody is looking around, is interested in an Italian restaurant, they have brochures that they can offer them, menus from 2 or 3 or 4 Italian restaurants, or any other kind of restaurant. I didn't mean to isolate the Italian restaurants,
Yes, please.
but they're really designed to serve both the visitors in terms of wayfinding and as a hospitality kind of thing, and at the same time to help with manage some of these other situations, and in a way that doesn't escalate into a police action, but it's really just. So, yes, sir.
I've been reading about, I think it's lot 11 and 12, anyway, the property in Santa Monica Boulevard and the trees being removed. I was kind of shocked and horrified on the administration of the city of Beverly Hills and how it was handled, at least from what I'm reading. And I live within 2 or 3 blocks on Alta, and I'm really quite shocked that you guys put my health at risk, given the toxic situation of that property and not handling it properly. What do you plan on doing about this?
All right. Well, thank you for that. There are a couple of parts to that. Right now, the soil has been sealed, so there is no issue with toxic substances at the moment. The city actually had soils tested and the air tested, and the results of that testing also demonstrated, except for the middle of the property where nobody is because now it's fenced, also negligible amounts of arsenic. The broader issue of how did we get to this, what happened or didn't happen or should have happened, is being investigated as we speak. We had a meeting last week where we discussed this. There's actually going to be a town hall meeting about this on the 27th in the chamber. Our goal is to fully debrief this, to be able to understand what the time course for things that happened, and where there were mistakes, what were the mistakes, and what can we do to correct them, and how do we prevent them in the future, and ultimately to hold people accountable who made those mistakes. But as we sit here today, we don't have enough information to really be able to speak authoritatively to what that is. So we're going to hire an outside consultant. I don't know if it's going to be Price Waterhouse or somebody of that stature, notwithstanding the fact that there have been multiple other sort of reviews of this. But we feel that it's important to get some absolutely objective, authoritative, and critical agency to investigate, provide the authoritative report on what happened, and based on what that is, make decisions about what we need to do next as it relates to the administrative element of that. As it relates to the actual land itself, what we have to do moving forward is understand how we could more completely mitigate that if we have to for the longer term. And I don't think we understand that yet either. That would be the subject of another report that we're going to do. Some of it is complicated by the conversation around Santa Monica Boulevard, because there's no doubt that the southernmost part of Santa Monica Boulevard and the northernmost part of those lots touch. So we will necessarily have to disrupt some of that as part of that process, and how we do that with the assistance of the state, the DTSC, to be determined, but that needs to be very clearly outlined before we do any of that. So there's a lot of work that's going to happen between here and there. In the interim, I don't think much is going to happen with that land. And as best we can tell, excuse me, at least for the short term, the land is safe. You know, not for, I would not recommend walking your dog there, but certainly for anybody who lives anywhere close to it, it's safe.
Do you have a way that
Excuse me.
take the property over by eminent domain?
You know, I think it's a premature conversation. I think that, first off, I think the process of eminent domain is a very complicated one, and one which this city council actually has had some experience with, and it was not a good experience. So I don't know. I think that that's a very premature conversation. We've not actually even had a substantive conversation with the current landowner, and I suspect that prior to any decision on the council's part to do anything, we would obviously have to engage with not only the landowner, but the DTSC about that land and what it could or couldn't be.
So the landowner can't do anything with that property unless he gets the approval of the city of Beverly Hills?
Correct.
He can't cut another tree down, or
Right.
a bush or anything?
Nothing can happen. The only thing that happened in the interim, for the sake of completeness, there was a car that went through the fence and landed up on that land, and they did have to repair that fence. But other than things that clearly impact the public safety, if there were a tree that was falling down that had to be dealt with, we would have to do that. Nothing can happen on that land. Beyond that, I know there's been a fair discussion about the development of that property, and that property is currently zoned as transportation. There is no purpose that that land can be used for currently without changing the zoning, independent of anything else. And so I would bet pretty strongly that it's unlikely that this council would change that zoning. So nothing's going to happen with that until we resolve each of those issues and then come back to the community with a plan. If there's a plan, it may be that nothing happens with that land for quite some time, but we will certainly be back to the community to discuss whatever it is that's going to happen and the results of what we're doing and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sir. Who else? Yes, sir.
I'm an owner of a pharmacy on Wilshire and San Vicente.
We just had that conversation.
Our landlord is right here. I came late, but I don't know. You discussed the situation about the Wilshire closure
We did.
and the impact to all the businesses that's in it.
We did. We had that conversation. And just to briefly summarize it, and I'm sure he'll fill you in on the bigger details, there have been no decisions yet made about either the duration of the closure. We have actually not seen the mitigation, the transportation mitigation plans. It remains a work in progress. The dollars that Metro will put to as business assistance, we've not even begun that conversation with them. I'm sure they will be substantial. We have been very clear with Metro that they have an obligation to the businesses in that corridor, that entire corridor, and to this point, they have acknowledged that, and have acknowledged that they will work with us to try and make this as painless as possible, recognizing that it will be painful. But
Just want to make sure, I'm sure you understand, closing that part of a section for 6 weeks, it's going to be devastating to all the business.
and again, Therese will take your name and contact information. We've had a number of meetings on this subject. I have to say that most of the people who've approached the council have been in favor of a 6-week versus a 16 or 17-week closure. We will have more conversations about this before it's finally decided, and I really encourage you to come and speak to the council on the subject and explain what the impacts will be. No decision has been made. Who else? Anybody else have anything
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Coming from the entertainment side of the business. Do we get any licensing fees from everybody using the Beverly Hills moniker?
So
I mean,
the answer
you
to
know, Housewives of Beverly Hills, You know, now the W Hotel in Westwood is Beverly Hills West.
Yeah.
I mean, do we get any license, do we get
No,
any?
so
Why?
anybody in the world, anybody who wants can call themselves Beverly Hills. You
How is
cannot trademark the name of a city or anything like that. However, if they use our shield, then there's a licensing fee. If they use anything else that is specifically trademark and identified, then there's a licensing fee. And we've actually pursued.
You can make a fortune, Julie.
We've actually pursued some who have used our either our shield or whatever without our permission. Most of them just stop. Sometimes it gets a little nastier than that, but for the most part, people have stopped when we've identified the fact that this is a trademark and that they have to pay the license fee. But as to the name Beverly Hills, we can't do anything
Really?
no. And I mean, Beverly Hills BMW is a case in point.
Because they're, right.
They're not in
right
Beverly
by
Hills.
La Brea now.
You know, it's like I had a mentor who used to say, it's like the Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, it wasn't an empire. So, yeah.
It's an Italian.
The Holy Roman Empire.
But if you wanna talk about that, tour buses.
Uh-huh.
Have any
Oh, God.
control of these tour buses?
Tour buses.
They're driving down, I live on Alta,
Uh-huh.
we live on Alta, and they're driving down Alta all the time.
Yeah. So the Alta's not a heavy haul road, is it? Alta has a weight limit. So this, you're hitting all the hot button topics tonight. It's good. So it's good. I think it's great. It's a test. It's a test of me to see if I know my stuff. So the fact of the matter is that there's a limitation based on weight. The city has a limited ability to control tour buses. The tour buses, for the most part, and it's a complicated, very arcane piece of law about which kind of tour buses we can or can't control and blah, 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 blah. But the short part of it is that we really don't have the ability to control tour buses per se. What we can do is we can control weight limits on our city streets. And there's most of the residential neighborhood, Alta included, I think, has a weight restriction of 6,000 pounds, 9,000 pounds. Are we up to 9,000? 6,000 pounds, thank you. And so 6,000 pounds, I mean, really, if you, is a loaded Escalade, it's probably 6,000 pounds, so that's not very big. So if you actually have tour buses that are going past that look bigger than an Escalade, those are things we ought to enforce against, and you should call us and the police will come and do that.
Well, what happens is like on a Friday night, typical, there's lots of traffic on Santa Monica going eastbound on a Friday night. So the tour buses don't, and it backs up from Doheny to Beverly Drive or Palm. So the tour buses don't wanna wait through that traffic, so what do? They turn left.
So what we ought to do is we can do some enforcement around that. That is enforceable. It gets more complicated if you live on a street like Palm or even in the Triangle where the weight limits are different and where we don't have the ability to control them quite so well. But in the residential neighborhood, we do have the ability, and you know, we have many more enforcement opportunities than we do policemen. And I probably had town halls like this maybe 10 times, 12 times in the course of this last year. And one of the things you guys haven't raised, and it's an opportunity if you want to, but is speeding on the streets.
Oh,
there you go. So there you go.
Yes.
And so we recognize. I mean, obviously we recognize this as a major issue, and you know, and I've said my street too. You know, I live on Palm, and it's on the way to Beverly, and 3 o'clock in the morning you hear the.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't have. You know, the only way you fix this is if you put a policeman on every street. You know, we need a motorcycle officer on every street in the city, and we just can't do that. So what we've done is we will move our enforcement efforts from an area where we recognize an impact. They'll enforce for a while, you know, quiet things down, and then they'll move on to an area that's got an impact, and ultimately it starts again in the first place, and we kind of move people around. And that's really the best we can do without fashioning some way to put a policeman on every street. On the speed piece of it, we've had some conversations about radar enforced, photo enforced speed. And we actually went to Sacramento because those rules are governed by the DMV, not by us. And we advocated for allowing photo enforced speeding tickets. And ultimately, it didn't get very far. It was opposed. The single greatest opposition came from the California Highway Patrol, oddly. Or maybe not, because in retrospect, it probably reflected the fact that they wanted a sworn officer writing tickets and not a machine. I guess that works.
But don't we have 5, 6 lights now where they're speeding?
So photo enforced red lights are different than photo enforced speed.
Okay.
The state allows go figure, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
it's a state. The state allows photo enforced red lights, it does not allow photo enforced speed. And just for completeness, it doesn't allow photo enforced stop signs, although if you happen to be in Franklin Canyon, which is not, you can get a ticket for going through a stop sign because that's federal land.
Right.
Can I make a suggestion?
You know.
May I make a suggestion?
Sure.
5 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, and at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Friday, put a policeman on Carmelina, and you'll write a lot of tickets for people running stop signs.
Oh, are you kidding? They sit in my
driveway.
I have the guys.
Can't get out of the driveway.
When I back up to go to work in the morning, they're sitting, I wave at them. Every once in a while I say, you want a cup of coffee? They're sitting in my driveway hunting, you know, and it's true. I mean, there are a lot of people who just go through those, you know, our former chief of police used to say that he thought that stop signs around here were merely a suggestion.
That's right. Yeah.
You know?
And
so,
everywhere.
and so we get it. It's a huge enforcement issue. It's true citywide. It doesn't matter if you're north or south, east or west. It's an enormous issue, and the tour bus thing is part of that. It's all about enforcement, and to the extent that we can, we will, and we do. But there are just limitations to what we can do.
I wanted to bring up an issue. First, I want to compliment the city on its stance and proactiveness in regards to outdoor dining and non-smoking in our city. I think that's tremendous. The newest trend that's coming up in secondhand smoke and legislation is multi-unit housing. And many cities have now begun to pass legislation. I believe Manhattan Beach was the most recent city to have passed, and I think Pasadena or other cities out there are passing this legislation. Beverly Hills has noticed multi-unit housing.
Smoking in an apartment.
No smoking in multi-unit.
Because of the passive smoke.
Sure.
It's a big health issue. So health data and research now has come forth saying this definitely is an issue. And I just, I think that this city's been a leader on so many issues, and I'm so proud of this city, and I hope they will, when that time comes soon, seriously consider the protection of the majority, and for the apartment owners who may be afraid to do this and afraid that it could impact them economically. That is not the case. The studies have been very successful as far as no lack of revenue or reduced revenue or income once imposing this legislation. As a matter of fact, there are fewer costs involved. There are fewer stains and carpets and draperies and fires and complaints by residents. So I just wanted to compliment the city and say I hope that you'll take a leadership role in the next wave of health.
Well, thank you. I think I've had that conversation with some of our health and safety commissioners. I thought it was on their agenda for conversation, but if not, we can suggest that. We just met with them at 5 o'clock today, so we can certainly.
I would be happy to provide any documentation.
No, I think it's a great idea, and we can suggest to them that this is something they begin to hold some hearings about, to talk about. It's a good
Are
idea.
you going to widen Santa Monica Boulevard, or are you just going to repair?
Some of Santa Monica Boulevard will get a little bit wider. The current plan
But not for
calls
another
for
lane.
about 6 feet of widening,
Not another
but
lane.
not taking it off the north side. But there is the current
I
plan.
remember Linda Briskman saying that those parking structures were built to be able to be moved. At one
I don't think
point.
we're moving the parking
No,
structures.
I don't
There
think-
is probably enough space between the parking structure and the street that we can capture some space. But I don't think we're gonna move those parking structures. Truthfully, if we're gonna move them, I'd build them again and bigger.
Right, we need them.
Will you be taking part of the parkway
No.
along Santa Monica for the roadway?
So if by the parkway you mean the Beverly Gardens Park, the
Yeah.
northern, there's no plan to take any of that.
And not even to take an inch of it?
As best, so those plans are, the Santa Monica Boulevard plan is not done. That said, there's been, the plans that they're drawing, there was direction not to take any of that space.
That's right.
Good.
Not to take any of that space. On the south side of that road, on the south side of North Santa Monica Boulevard, it's complicated with the north and south, but on the, closer to the strips we were talking about before, there is an opportunity to take some space to make the roadway wider. There is that, but not on the north side of the street, not on the north side.
But if West Hollywood doesn't do anything with Santa Monica Boulevard or the Doheny, I mean, is it?
I'm sorry?
If West Hollywood isn't going to also repair Santa Monica Boulevard? up to
West
the-
Hollywood, Santa Monica Boulevard's in pretty good shape. They did that
Is
just a
it
number
really?
of years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Is it in
It's
good
wider and it's nicely paved. It's actually in pretty good shape.
Could I make another suggestion?
Sure.
On the park, on the corner of Doheny and Santa Monica, where there's the fountain.
Uh-huh.
I know that dogs off leash are not allowed, you're supposed to have your dog on leash at all times. But unfortunately, quite a few residents, either residents of Beverly Hills or residents of West Hollywood will follow that rule. And they take their dogs off leash into that park. And they're running around at 5 o'clock, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. When I always drive by, I look at it and I think all it takes is to have a dog
Run into the snap.
running and his attention gets diverted, he's looking at something and runs out in the street and there'll be a horrible accident. I would suggest that you put a fence, a small fence or a fence around that whole, or some sort of enforcement, something.
We can take a look at that.
We can have rangers take a look at
We
that.
can take a look at that. I don't know that the community would love a fence, but I think it's worth looking at. From the safety perspective, what would it take to make it safer? I think it's a good idea. So it's late. I know most of you, I don't know if any of you sat through the President's State of the Union
Good
speech.
to see you, Julian.
I did, I missed it unfortunately, I'm here, so.
Are you gonna stay in the city council? You gonna-
After the mayor's rotation, I have 3 more years on the council,
Oh, good,
so,
very good.
God willing, I'm not going, I mean, from my perspective, God willing, I'm not going anywhere. I don't know about you guys, but from my perspective, I'm happy
Oh,
about that.
address what you said in the beginning with Willie Bryan's replacement. What's gonna happen there?
So Willie has not yet given us a date for his resignation from the council. The law, so the city had a law up until recently which basically mandated that we hold an election if in the event of a council member's resignation. And that actually was in counter distinction to a state law which allowed for either a nomination, an appointment to the position, and or an election. So to allow this council the opportunity to do either without making a decision about which we want to do, but to at least allow the opportunity if we so chose. The council did repeal the standing city ordinance so that now we are fully compliant with state law. And if the council decides, we could appoint the position. The timing of either an appointment or an election is prescribed by state law, and it's very strict. And it all triggers when he submits his resignation. So based on that, we will either have to have an election in June, or if we miss the time frames for that, and I think February 8th is the last day that would be allowed. If we miss that deadline and his resignation comes later, then we are looking at a November election. You can't just have an election whenever you want. It has to coincide with a scheduled election. So we're looking then at either a June or a November election if we have an election based on the date that he resigns. If the council decided it would rather appoint the position, then there's a time frame for that too. We have to make the appointment within 60 days of the date of his resignation, triggers again from the resignation. The council has not had that conversation. We're likely to have that conversation no later than the second meeting in February. There are probably pros and cons to both. One of the issues I think that people are a little bit stymied by is the fact that a year from March, so maybe 14 months from now, we actually have a scheduled election at which time 3 positions will be available. Council members Krasny, Brian, if he didn't resign, and the vice mayor. So we're potentially looking at an election in June, and then another election in March, an election in November, and another election in March. And that's expensive for the city and a little daunting for anybody who would be a candidate, assuming that you were going to compete in both elections, the June-November election, and then assuming you're unsuccessful with that, again in March. So that's a lot, and I think that's probably the conversation that the council is going to have as it tries to decide what's in the public's interest and what's also reasonable for people who would want to be on the city council. But we've not had that conversation yet, and as I say, I expect it'll be no later than the second meeting in February.
Hypothetically, if Willie Ryan gave notice February 20th and you missed the June deadline, I don't know what the minimum amount of notice that he needs to give is, but what I heard you say is that if we have an election, it would have to wait till November, because we would have missed the June election. So if he gives notice February 20th, and he leaves prior to November, what happens to his spot?
He can't give, it doesn't matter when he gives notice. His notice will have an effective date. So he could say, you know, I'm gonna leave on whatever, February 20th, but until he actually hands in the piece of paper that says, I resign, nothing happens. So we're not able to, there's no hypothetical here. We're not able to do anything until he physically resigns the position. And at that point, all the time frames start.
Because what I'm asking is, if he hands it to you after the February deadline, and you cannot have an election until November, and when he hands it to you in February, he's going to be leaving prior to November.
Right.
Then what is the policy? What are the rules for the gap period?
Right. Well, we could do one of a couple of things. We could do one of a couple of things. The easiest would be to have a 4-member council until the November election is done. So we can conceivably go from whenever he submits his resignation until the results of the November election, in your scenario, and the seating of whoever the winner of that election is, which would probably be the 2nd or 3rd week in November, assuming that the election went easily and we didn't have to recount it 100 times and things like that. Alternatively, I suppose, and I'm a little bit beyond my comfort zone in giving you this answer, but I suspect there's probably a provision for a temporary appointment from the time he resigns until the results of that November election are known, and then the seating of whoever wins that election. That might be an option.
And then one other thing is, would we be allowed to do the following? Let's say you decide to wait and have a November election and have a vacant seat for whatever that period of time is after Willie leaves. Come the end of November, you've only got a short period, I don't know, December, January, February, 3 months before the next election. Doesn't it typically take about that long or longer for an individual who hasn't been a city council member to kind of get up to speed? Would we be allowed to just keep it open until March and not go through the expense for a 3-month position that it's going to take that person that long to get up to speed anyway?
No, we can't. Unfortunately, we can't. We would be forced to re-elect that position. The other question I asked was, could we, is there an opportunity, and I don't know if this would make any sense, but hold all of the elections in November and just seat 1 member in November and the other 2 in March, so that nobody's term is diminished, but we only have to have the election once. That's not allowed by state law. And other permutations that looked at trying to minimize the impact and such, and it's pretty rigid. There's not a lot of wiggle room in this. We're gonna have to play by the rules. The timeframes have been set by the state. That's all we're gonna do.
Could he be a non-resident council member?
No.
No, no.
By law, in order to serve on the council, you have to be a resident. Yeah. And in point of fact, people who leave town resign, if you leave town because your house flooded and you're rebuilding it, it's a little different. But if you leave town because you want to leave town, you resign it's not only true for the council, it's also true for our commissions. You need to be a resident. So I thank you all for coming out tonight. It's great to see you. I appreciate it. Thank you. We will get back to you. For those things for which we have open questions, we will get back to you with the answers to those questions. If you leave your contact information, that would be really great. Thank you.
You were very spectacular. Welcome to the mayor. You were very spectacular.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad you're here.
Well, I was glad I was here, and I did get the president's message, that's why I was late.
I get it. It will be, I look younger than he does. You do. Great to see you. Nicely done. You know, when you did
City because it's a public
It's
another way to check. Use the money for the thing that it turned out very cool because the city's so we were very concerned, well, what if they can't get hit? So that's the kind of stuff. I suppose we have to develop a full concrete policy that will have to withstand the court challenge. The council has been very reticent. He was talking about the possibility the city attorney's office help. We can get a third party, say a charity or something. She said they have a which is a non-profit. And you say, we lease you space. You go contract with advertiser. That has an opportunity then controls and we're actually trying to explore that. In fact, I'm working with the city attorney's office